What it do, YouTube? It's your boy Mike from NYC, and we are back on the reaction. Today we are reacting to Jordan Peterson's best moments. One of my, you know what I'm saying, people that I'm kind of warming up to, one of my favorite people to hear speak. I don't agree with everything that he says, but I do agree with a lot of the points that he makes. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when you have a basketball debate, right? And I say, for example, I feel like Kobe Bryant is better than Larry Bird. But you say, no, Larry Bird is better because, you know, Larry Bird 4-time 40, 50, 90. Kobe never did that. You know what I'm saying? Larry Bird 3-time back-to-back MVP. Kobe never did that. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like you bring in valid points, even though I may disagree. You know, I can respect your opinion because you are bringing valid points to the table. I feel like Jordan Peterson, even though I do agree with him most of the time, he does always bring up valid points. So without any further ado, let's see Jordan Peterson's best moments.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why
were they here? Well, how can I
are there views in alignment with yours? At some point, you have to realize.
That's a foolish question. Look, do you want to know what my views are?
I've watched all of your videos. Yes.
Including
yes, I have.
Yeah. Then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
Apparently,
all of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
Do you want to disavow 150 videos on YouTube?
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay. Do you want to disavow the support? Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really think that you're worth all of that time?
Bitch!
I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
that sounds very much like a threat. That sounds very much like a threat. That sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yes.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to. And I'm going to post this online that you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I'm a person of color.
I am a person of color, and I felt very accommodating. I felt like my voice. Thank you very much.
I'm also a Muslim, and I feel like this guy.
I'm a person of color.
You wanted to disavow. You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavowal. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence. And violence is lurking. And you can say that that sounds like a threat.
There was no violence at our protest, though. There was violence at your protest. So what does that say about our views?
It's not my protest. You know, asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation.
Is that a fair point? People don't have the right to dictate what language I use, which is fair. I think that's fair. I think we can agree to disagree. You know what I mean? Because at what point do you draw the line? I think it's more of a. It's less about agreeing with it and more about just being accommodating. If somebody asked me to use an alternative pronoun, I guess I would use it. Not because I agree with whatever they're trying to get me to, not what I agree with them necessarily, but more so to just be accommodating. You know what I mean? It's like, it's really just like a human thing. Like, if I woke up to a stranger and the stranger says, "Hey, could you bring out your phone real quick? Can you tell me the time?" If I don't feel threatened, I'm gonna pull out my phone and tell them time, even if I don't feel like stopping and talking to them, because that's just the most convenient, accommodating thing to do. If it's not way out of my way, if it's not too much, I guess I would do it. But to understand his point of view and saying that I'm not gonna call you a different pronoun because of X, because I don't feel like you have the right to dictate my language. I feel like it's fair. I don't feel like that's wrong.
when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
And Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people. It's about protections for transgender people. And that's not, it's not about Jordan Peterson. So, we should have people learning to listen more. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a very good reason. When things get political, I like to ask who benefits and who gets to decide the rules of the game. So, mostly with this Peterson controversy, which is really just a small drama, a tempest in a teapot, he could just get over learning to program a few pronouns into his phone. By the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis, so it's not all that difficult.
Professor Peterson, sorry, Professor Peterson, you can jump in because I think Professor Peterson wants to get in on that.
Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say. So, if we're bandying back and forth our differences in values, I would say that the highest possible value is truth, and that one of the concomitants is that we need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit. And I think that that's a value that's much higher than kindness, for example. I mean, there's lots of situations in life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all. But so, for example, when you discipline children, you often hurt their feelings in the short term so that they can learn to behave properly in the medium to long term so that their lives go well. And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable. And I don't think that Pete's solution to program my cell phone so that I can remember what names people need to be called is a reasonable solution at all. We're actually supposed to now use electronic devices to bolster our ability to speak freely
in case we offend someone?
That these made-up pronouns, of which there are many, dozens in fact, and there's no consensus on them, and that doesn't even begin to start a discussion about the use of the other kin pronouns, and you can look those up if you want, because if you can define your identity subjectively any way you want, then there's absolutely no reason that you can't claim a non-human identity. And you may not know, but in the LGBT Rainbow Coalition, there is Q+, and the Q+ people include the otherkins who claim a non-human identity, and they're arguing in that Rainbow Coalition that they have the same right to their pronouns that everyone else does, and their pronouns include such things as worm self. You're not supposed to interrupt.
Actually, I was just going to ask if you could go back to the point about the analogy between the racial slur and the
I don't think there's any analogy at all.
But that's
I think
what
the difference
people want to hear you
I'm
on.
talking about compelled speech. There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard
that's a fair point, because I did think about that. I did think about race, and I did think about the fact that how's that the idea of somebody controlling your freedom of speech. How is that different than somebody calling me out of my name, a racial slur, this, that, and the third? But, saying things that you can't say is very much different than saying things that you have to say. And it is very much different. So I think that is a very good point. And he does bring up a good point about, the LGBTQ community, including non-human pronouns, and identifying oneself as a non-human. And I guess, I would say that the majority of people I would say that there's a subgroup of people that don't necessarily agree with what is being done, but will be nice and accommodating by going along with it, just because that's the most simplest thing to do. And most people don't want to deal with unnecessary conflict. I would say the majority, like the high majority of people, don't want to deal with conflict in general, but especially unnecessary, unneeded conflict. I would say most of those people are just being accommodating. But he makes a fair point to, at what point do we draw a line to where you are being identified as something that is just objectively not true? You're identifying yourself as maybe, he said worms, so I'm assuming different animals or different inanimate objects or things, or just things that you are objectively by no measure outside of your imagination are, So I guess it's really like, you know, at what point do we draw the line? Where's the line? And I think that's always difficult, you know, with you know, policies and things like that. And, you know, the abortion thing is something that's pretty recent that people have had a lot of comments about. You know, it's very like, you know, where do you draw the line? You know, because I was thinking about that, you know, and I see both sides. I see both sides. I see the pro-choice and I see the pro-life, you know. And if you're gonna sit up here and say that you don't understand both sides, I think that you're being maybe a little stubborn and maybe ignorant and not at least acknowledging both sides. But I would say that it makes sense, you know what I mean? Because, you know, you could say, you know, you are killing live, or not born, but you're killing babies that are alive. And, you know, I guess there's something to be said about that. But on the other hand, there are situations where, you know, women do get raped and, you know, sexually assaulted, you know. So it's just like, how do you draw that line? And I was thinking like, okay, do you draw the line and just say, okay, you can have an abortion only if you were sexually assaulted, which to then is like, you know, it's very difficult to play that line. I feel like I don't know much about it, but just looking at it on its surface and, you know, hearing the general argument of both sides, I definitely understand both sides because, you know, I don't have a uterus. I've never have been pregnant, nor will I ever be pregnant. So it's hard for me to really have an opinion on something like that I could never experience.
These made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
Now he's spazzing.
Who I'm a great admirer of, once described an old religious idea, and that was that God ruled the world with two hands, right and left, mercy and justice. And the world couldn't survive if only mercy applied, because then no one would ever be
held accountable,
encouraged to adopt the trappings and responsibilities of adulthood. You end up in a situation where you're forgiven for absolutely everything you do or fail to do.
Right.
You're thrust into the Freudian nightmare of the Oedipal family, where your utter uselessness is forgiven on the grounds of compassion, and you end up living in your mother's basement until you produce fantasies as a consequence of your squelched development of perhaps going out and shooting up a high school. Mercy, in its excess, produces pathology. Justice, in its excess...
Wait. Meaning of pathology.
Pathology means the science of the causes and effects of diseases, especially the branch of medicine that deals with the laboratory examination of samples of body tissue for diagnostic or forensic purposes.
Okay. I think the definition he's referring to is mental, social, or linguistic abnormality or malfunction, which I think is the one that probably makes the most sense. Let's move on.
Produces pathology too, because people are not perfect, and that means that we all fail when we attempt to do the things that we know that we should do. And so being held to account for our failures has to be tempered by mercy, but both principles have to apply. Justice means there's structure and rules, and the people who abide by the structure and play by the rules and move towards the top win. And mercy means we're forgiven our failures so that we can rise up and play again. But you can't have one without the other, because the world falls apart if you do. And this is my problem with tolerance, because tolerant people, first of all, let's say those who proclaim the virtues of tolerance, believe that they're tolerant, but
Generally, that's not the case. They just don't want to accept the responsibility that playing by the rules would bring.
Okay. What's with this eerie ass music, bruh?
One of the problems with postmodernism is that, and this is a big problem, like this is a fatal problem, apart from the fact that it's incoherent and there's no value structure in it, and it's fundamentally divisive and destructive. There's a logical problem with it too that's even worse. And so you might be noticing that the LGBT set of acronyms keeps growing, eh? And it's kind of a form of its own parody in some sense. It's like, well, I'm oppressed. It's like, yeah, you are. And, well, I'm oppressed too. Yeah, you're also oppressed. And maybe I'm even oppressing you, being part of this other marginalized group, but at least we share our oppression. Well, I'm also oppressed. Well, so am I. I'm oppressed too. It's like, okay, so here's a problem. There's a big problem here. The problem is, it's true. You're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. God only knows why. Maybe you're too short, or you're not as beautiful as you could be, or your grandparent was a serf, likely, because almost everybody's great-grandparent was. It's like, and you're not as smart as you could be, and you have a sick relative, and you have your own physical problems, and it's like, frankly, you're a mess. And you're oppressed in every possible way, including your ancestry and your biology, and the entire sum of human history has conspired to produce victimized you with all your individual pathological problems. It's like, yes, true. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering? Try to reduce it. Start with yourself. What good are you? Get yourself together, for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner, and you can help plan the funeral, and you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you. That's better. Don't be a damn victim. Of course you're a victim. Jesus, obviously. How do you overcome the suffering of life? Is be a better person. That's how you do it. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility. There's all these rude people out there. They've got problems like you can't believe. Off they go to work and do things they don't even like. And look, the lights are on. My God, it's unbelievable. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And we're so ungrateful. College students, the postmodern types, they're so ungrateful. They don't know that they're surrounded by just a bloody miracle. It's a miracle that all this stuff works. That all you crazy chimpanzees that don't know each other can sit in the same room for 2 hours sweltering away without tearing each other apart, because that's what chimps do. So, with regards to respect...
Yeah, I could agree with that. It seems like the more we get, the less anything means. You know what I mean? It's so funny how somebody could live in America and and have food and water and shelter and all the necessities and all the things that a human being needs, but could be way less happy than somebody who doesn't really eat regularly. It's just like the more we have, the less things mean. It's like the people's highest up got the lowest self-esteem. It's just like it's the more we get, the less it sometimes means. So, I think I would say that's why it's good to wait. That's why it's good to, to not get everything right away. Because if you get everything right away, it doesn't mean anything. I forgot who it was. That bald dude that be ranting about girls and stuff like that. I forget his name, but he said, the human body doesn't really know that going 200 miles per hour is fast, but the only way it's fast is that the acceleration of 200 miles is fast. So if you start off going 200 miles per hour, aka if you start off, silver spoon, if you start off, having everything that you could possibly want, those things that you have don't mean anything because it's always been there. That's like the survival of humans. That's kind of like how the way humans survive, because the people with less, they don't necessarily know that they have less, and the people with more don't necessarily know that they have more. That's like the tricky part. Like, it's hard for the people who have more to even appreciate what they really have, and it's harder for the people who have less to understand that they don't really have. So he said the acceleration, aka going from broke to rich, is actually what makes having money or having success or having a great life actually worth something when you haven't had anything, when you have been broke. That's what makes being rich so valuable. You know what I mean? It's like just being rich from the gate. It's kind of whack. I don't want to say it's whack because I don't want to act like poverty is something that is just cool or just like is nothing. You know, I don't want to be disrespectful, but being rich, you know, or having something doesn't mean as much when you've always had it. So I feel him on that, on people being ungrateful, including myself in some areas. There's some areas where I'm probably very ungrateful, and I try to be as aware of that as I can, but you know, it happens.
You know, you said, well, human civilization progresses a lot better if we respect one another, and I actually don't believe that at all. I believe that human civilization progresses and maintains itself when we respect people who've earned respect. You don't just respect everybody randomly. Well, what the hell use is respect if you just respect people randomly? It's like inflating the currency, you know? It's like the Simpsons episode where, you know, Bart gets a trophy because it's every child gets a trophy day. All you do is inflate the currency. Respect is actually limited to that category of people who have earned respect in some manner. So whatever you're talking about with regards to, say, common decency between people, it's not respect. And the definitions actually matter. They matter a lot. And so I hear the respect argument all the time, but you also can't force me to respect you. I mean, you might be able to force me to act like I respect you, but you can't force me to respect you. It's just not possible. There's a complex issue here, which is to what degree do you allow individuals to govern the conversation that's had about them in their presence or otherwise. But I would just revert back to my original argument, which is that's a negotiation. It's either a negotiation. You got 3 states. You can negotiate with someone. You can be their slave, or you can be their tyrant. And I would pick negotiation, but as far as I'm concerned, the law right now, as it's currently instantiated, is a tyrant, and it makes people into its slave, and we're going to pay for that. And it's predicated on, hypothetically, on respect and compassion. I don't buy that for a second. I don't think that's true in the least. And there's a huge literature on compassion. Here's a problem with compassion. Mother grizzly bears are very, very compassionate towards their cubs. But if you get near those cubs, they'll tear you to pieces. And that's the flip side of compassion. And I'm speaking not as a lawyer here, but as a psychologist. That's already well documented. Compassion is by no means an emotion that produces the desired social outcome. Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. Life is very much more complicated than well, if you were just empathic, everything would work out. It's like you can't be equally empathic to everyone. And that's a big problem. They basically, in order to not bother anyone who they had consulted with, they decided, for example, that gender identity should be nothing but subjective choice, which is, I don't even know what to say about that. If you're a psychologist and you have any sense at all, that's a completely insane proposition. It's, first of all, predicated on the idea that your identity is your subjective choice. And that's never been the case for any sort of identity anywhere. So partly your identity is the set of tools with which you function in the actual world, and part of it is a negotiated agreement with the other people around you, and that's all being taken out of that's all actually, as far as I can tell, that line of theorizing is technically illegal now in Ontario. And I'm not even talking about the potential biological basis of identity, because the idea that identity has no biological basis, that's just wrong. Like factually wrong. So, and we've written a social constructionist, we've written a radical social constructionist view of identity into the law, but even worse than that, we've gone beyond social constructionism, because Piaget was a constructionist, into just pure whim. Your identity can be at any moment what you assume that it's going to be. That's not a tenable solution. There's nothing about that proposition that's reasonable.
So I'm going to read you something that a graduate student sent me from the University of Toronto the other day, and I can also tell you that I've received hundreds of letters like this. Today, I had a tutorial at the University of Toronto where I talked about Jordan Peterson and issues of personal identity, legally sanctioned identity categories, etc. I brought up a video of a tall white man in his 30s who asked students at a university how they'd react if he told them he identified as a woman, as black, as short, and as 5 years old. Spoiler alert. Students in the video resist some of the later categories a bit, but are mostly accepting. Still, Students were not engaging in discussion. I asked them why. One said it was because she was worried to share her opinion for fear of being singled out or saying something.
Bro, this is feeling very like, this is giving me very much like Hitler energy. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying anybody's Hitler. I'm just saying that the fear of actually speaking what you believe is the very thing that, you know, people use to, or I'm not gonna say people, but Hitler used, at least what I learned in school. I don't know, maybe they're teaching me some fool stuff, but from what I learned in school, only a small percentage, and it's a high chance that they are teaching me some stuff that wasn't necessarily true. But from what I remember in school, only a small percentage, around 10% of the people actually agreed with what Hitler was actually saying, but the fear of being ostracized and or killed or whatever, you know, some type of repercussion or punishment, it kept the people from actually speaking up. And that very thing allowed Hitler to take power. And so the fear of being, you know, the fear of some type of societal punishment, and that being the reason that you don't want to speak your truth is I don't want to say scary, but it's very off-putting, and it's just it's not good, for lack of a better term.
I asked who else was not speaking for that reason. The whole class put their hands up. No participation. Why? They weren't uninterested. They were afraid to speak their minds. I'll start with Lawyer 1, who was the counsel to several prime ministers. He talked to me about the Human Rights Tribunal because I went and saw him 2 weeks after this all started. Human Rights Tribunal is a kangaroo court, in my opinion, and it should be abolished as fast as possible. It's one of the many institutions in Canada that pose a threat to your freedom that is of almost unimaginable proportions. Here's what this top lawyer told me. If I'm taken in front of the Human Rights Tribunal, it will cost me $250,000. I will pay the legal costs for my opponents, and I will lose. He said, go back to your safe little life and shut your mouth. The proposition that your identity is somehow unmoored from a reality outside of your subjective...
Damn, can we get something other than this transgender stuff? Like, I feel like he's like, whoever made this video, like, is these all his best moments? He don't have nothing talking about something else. I'm kind of over hearing about it. Like, he's already said his piece. I've already said mine. I feel like I kind of want to move on.
Linguistic space is also, it's wrong. There's no other way of putting it. So, like, and this is written into the law already. So the proposition is that biological sex, which many of the holders of say, what, admiration for this law don't even believe exists, which I don't even know what to say about that, but the proposition is that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual preference vary independently. That's the law. And it's wrong. It isn't even close to right. The bloody Human Resources Department at the University of Toronto has a...
I think that a lot of what I will say to that is, though whether or not that's true, I don't know how fully relevant that is. I think that, you know, at least the idea of America was based on the very foundation that right or wrong, as long as you're not affecting anybody else, you should have the freedom to be right or wrong. Right? There's many different religions, right? Where in other countries you may not have the religious freedom to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. But in America, the very foundation of America is that you have the freedom to be wrong. Whether or not we agree with you or not is irrelevant. We are giving you the freedom to be wrong. We are giving you the freedom of speech, the freedom to bear arms. And that's the whole premise. You know, whether or not that's been fully executed and, you know, things like that is irrelevant. That's the whole premise, right? And I think it's sometimes difficult to toe it's kind of difficult to toe the line. Like, when do you say when? At what point do you say when? You know, it's like, all right, well, I wanna be a Christian. Cool. You know, I want to be able to vote. Cool. I want to have a company that makes $1 million, or I want to be an entrepreneur. Cool. I want to be a woman, even though I have, I was born a biological man. Say that again? No. Like, I know I was born this way, but I want to switch over. Like, I'm tired of being a woman. I want to be a man now. Okay. You know what? Kind of over being white. Want to be black. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's sometimes, as long as it's not really affecting anybody else, I feel like the way that this country moves is they don't really care. The premise and the idea of this country is that we're giving you the freedom to be right or wrong, whatever.
At an equity position. Okay, so what equity means is that it doesn't mean equality of opportunity. It means equality of outcome. And that is, so this is the idea. The idea is that you take a social institution like a university, and then you look at the organization of that university at every single strata, from the executive level all the way down to the student level. Then what you do is you do an analysis of each level by community demography, right? You get to define the demographic characteristics that you're going to discuss, however, which is actually a big problem. Then you make the presupposition that unless that organization at every level matches the demographic representation of people at every level, then it's corrupt, oppressive, and discriminatory, and it needs to be changed. Okay, so you think, well, what's wrong with that? Every level should have 50-50 men and women, let's say. It's like, you're really sure about that, are you? No. You're so sure about that. You don't think there's any natural differences in interest between men and women? Well, if you don't think so, then why are most psychology classes 80% women? And that differentiation is accelerating rapidly, like I've seen it over the course of my career, from maybe 60% men at the beginning of my career to like 80% women now. And men occupy more of the positions in the STEM fields, at least for now. It's the same in bloody Scandinavia. It's 20-to-1 nurses, 20-to-1 women to man nurses in Scandinavia, and 20-to-1 men to women in engineering. And that's in Scandinavia. And so what's happened in Scandinavia, as they've made the society more egalitarian in terms of its legal and social structures, is that the gender differences in personality between men and women have got bigger, not smaller. So what that means is that social constructionism is wrong. That's what it means. Wrong. Disproved. It's exactly the opposite of what the theory would have predicted, because the theory predicted, and God only knew how it was going to sort itself out. It's not like people knew this to begin with. The idea was that as you equalize the social structure, that the differences between men and women would disappear. Guess what? That didn't happen. And it's not studies of just a few hundred people in a few locations. Those are population-wide studies, and they've been replicated multiple times. So, and the funny thing is that, so there are temperamental differences between men and women. And neuroticism and agreeableness are not the only temperamental differences. So if you fragment extroversion, it fragments into assertiveness and gregariousness. Women are more gregarious, men are more assertive. If you fragment conscientiousness into orderliness and industriousness, women are more orderly and men are more industrious. If you fragment openness, which is the creativity dimension, into interest in ideas and interest in aesthetics, you find that women are more interested in aesthetics and men are more interested in ideas. So because you can fractionate the big 5 into 10, you get gender differences across all of them, and they're not trivial either. They make a difference. So, okay, so anyways, back to the equity thing, of all the preposterous and idiotic ideas. So, first of all, to make gender equity across every dimension of an organization, you have to assume that men and women have identical interests and temperaments,
and that if they don't, the state should intervene to bloody well ensure that they do, which is something for all you women to figure out, because now there's many positions in society that women preferentially occupy. So what are you going to do about that? And what are you going to do about the Asians? Because they occupy preferential positions as well. You know, they're overrepresented in all sorts of professional institutions. And the probability is that that's going to increase. What are you going to do about that? What about the Jews? What are you going to do about them? Because they're in the same position as the Asians. You're going to put quotas on all those people? What kind of stupidity is that? And then it's worse too, because let's say you equalize women, and just for the sake of argument, across all these different dimensions of society. Well, then what are you going to do? Are you going to equalize for black women and Latino women and Asian women? Are you going to subtype black women, because it's not like they're all the same? Are you going to ensure that women from lower classes are represented just as much as women from upper classes? And how many?
That's the problem. That's the problem with really everything that's really going on. There's no line in the sand, and it's making everything very difficult. I'm not saying that other countries are better. I'm definitely not. I've never been there. I have very little knowledge on what other countries do. But a lot of other countries, especially Middle Eastern countries, they don't have it all perfect. There's no euphoria society. There's no society that has everything perfectly perfect. That's just not how things are going to happen. But what I will say that they do, that I think that America doesn't do quite as well, is that they have a line. They know their lines. They know they have a line in the sand. The line in the sand is very defined. It is very clear where they stand. Or it's a lot more clear, at least, where they stand. You know, it's very clear. Though it may be more oppressive, which, you know, is a downside and more restrictive and less freedom, you know, which is the great part about America. America doesn't really have many lines in the sand. They have, you know, they have some, you know what I mean, based on the Constitution and stuff like that, and they have to work from what's in the Constitution, which I understand. But in terms of modern day problems and solutions, there's not many lines in the sand. There's not many things that they say yes or no. It's kind of like this gray area. Well, what if? Well, what if? I don't know, you know, so.
Generations back are you going to go to check that? What about intelligence? What about attractiveness? How about height? How about weight? So the problem with the fractionation by group identity is that it's endless. There's no way of ensuring equality across groups because there's an infinite number of groups. You can fragment group identity all the way down to the level of the individual, which is exactly what you should do, which is what we already did in the West. We figured, well, the ultimate diverse population is a population of individuals, so you let the individuals sort it out. No, we're going to replace that with group. Well, what that means for the bloody social activists is that they'll be able to play this game forever because you can continually fractionate group identity ad nauseum, and so the system will never be equal. And you can bloody well be sure that as we implement social policy to make sure that all outcomes are equal, that the amount of space that you personally are going to have to maneuver in is going to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. We've already seen that happen in many societies. You think we would learn from the 20th century?
I was just going to ask if you could go back to the point about the analogy between the racial slur and the
I don't think there's any analogy at all.
But that's
I think
what
the difference
people want to hear you
I'm
on.
talking about compelled speech.
Yeah. All right. So this video is, we've seen this part already. This was an interesting video to say the least. He definitely made some good points. He definitely opened my eyes to some things that I wasn't really paying attention to. And if I'm being very honest, have no bearing on my life currently. So sorry if I say that I don't. My life or anybody that I know's life, or at least anybody that I know that's made it clear to me that this is impacting their life. And I'm not saying that it's not relevant. I'm not saying that it's not important or something that needs to be discussed. But I would say that it's not something that I have high ventured interest in. You know, but I'm definitely open to conversation and, you know, understanding different viewpoints and different ways of thinking. I think that's really what I want on this channel in general. You know, like I said before, whether it's, you know, basketball related or non-basketball related, I want a community of people to share ideas and to share viewpoints, and for people to have a understanding of the other side. If we have a bunch of left-wing people and a bunch of right-wing people, I guess for lack of a better term, whatever you want to call it, I think that if I can make this platform a platform that allows those two sides to clearly understand where the other side is coming from, and give it reasonable thought and consideration, I feel like that would be all that I can ask for. So yeah, definitely let me know what you guys think. Definitely like, comment, share, and subscribe if you like these type of videos, and I will see you when I see you. Peace.